All right, folks, why don't we go ahead and get started? Be aware that this webinar will be recorded and available to AEC members. You'll have that posted online shortly after the event. So if you miss some of it or have to step away, don't worry, you can come back to it. Again, I'm Jeff Henderson, your president of the AEC. I'm joined today by Matthew McConkey and Warren Payne from Mayor Brown. We've been working with Mayor Brown and Matthew and Warren now since the onset of the 232. I've invited them to come in and speak today and talk about how urgent this issue has become and a plan of attack that we want to move forward with. During the course of my discussions with these folks, they know our situation, that we're under assault from imports from a variety of countries now, that our aluminum prices have been pegged at a position that makes us uncompetitive globally due to the 232. And with the exclusions that have taken place with the USMCA, it's really complicated issues in North America. So with that said, and a backdrop of all that we've been talking about, Mayor Brown came to me with an idea that we've not been presented with before. It's called a 201. And it's not a 301, it's not a 232, it's a 201. And I was intrigued by it, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to tack that discussion onto our discussion today about the 232. So they are separate issues, but I think you'll find in our discussions that we've got a plan of attack for 232. It's not going to be the solution to our problems. I think we're playing defense on 232. You'll hear more about that. But in terms of the 201, it may be an alternative for us to consider in the coming months as we watch the market unfold, as opposed to bundling a bunch of countries and launching an AD/CVD case like we talked about in San Antonio. So let me get started with my slides. So we will talk about the AEC trade update. I want to talk about some of the recent developments just to keep you alert while I have you on the phone, or keep you up to date rather, not alert. And then we'll have those discussions about 232, our path forward, and then we'll discuss this 201. So our update on our trade issues. I hope you saw the trade alert earlier this week, a victory, a big win for our industry in solar mounting systems. I want to call out Andy Curlin from Vitex, who was instrumental in helping us win this decision. Andy and I participated in a conference call with the Department of Commerce in March after the stay-at-home orders were in place. And Andy gave vital testimony to their decision, and we were able to win. What enabled us on the legal front to win was the fact that, keep in mind, that solar mounting systems are a product category that we actually lost a case on back in the last administration. It was during that time that the Obama administration made the interpretation of our orders that a subassembly or a kit with a variety of add-on products, fasteners and whatnot, would make it ineligible to be covered by our orders, which we reacted with shock, because it was the essence of our orders to cover products exactly like that. So we had several decisions that came out after they set that precedent that went against us. We went on a real losing streak, and one of the key product categories that we lost was a solar mounting system case. So at that time, of all of the cases that we were losing on the scope because of that ruling, we chose one that we thought we could win. We simply did not have the financial resources in those days to fight all of them. So we picked one that we thought we could win on legal grounds in order to establish a legal precedent that would enable us to go back and maybe reclaim some of that lost ground. And we tried that, but unfortunately we lost in that effort. So we were a bit stuck. Then we had this kitchen appliance handle case that we've been fighting with Whirlpool on for years. And we felt like if we could, that particular scope challenge ended up in the courts. And we believed that if we could win that case in the courts on the right grounds, it would establish a precedent that would force Commerce to go back and revisit some of these earlier decisions, and in the right at the right time be able to move them in our direction. And we did win that kitchen appliance handle case, and we did win it on the grounds that we wanted. And it was that legal precedent plus the testimony of a member going in, working on the solar mount systems case that got us that win. And it's a big one. So really hats off to the team that worked on that. On administrative reviews, I want to let you know the 8th administrative review is on the anti-dumping case has been finalized. The rates are 86.02%. It is unchanged in the last 3 years. We've had rock solid duty there on the dumping side. The countervailing duty part of our case, we don't imagine that we're going to get a decision on it until a little later in the summer. With the stay-at-home orders, things have slowed a little bit in certain areas, but we expect it'll come. And our expectation is that it'll be in line with their preliminary decision, and those rates will remain unchanged as well. And depending on the extruder in China, they range anywhere from 12 to 20%. And that effectively gives us a duty in total of approximately 100% or more. So it's a really, really good number for us, and it's been quite effective. On transshipment and circumvention, all I can tell you because of the confidentiality behind this is that we are working on this. I've got an announcement that I am itching to make to the industry, and I just can't do it. But it's just a few weeks, I hope, away from us being able to say. But I can assure you that in key areas of interest to our members, things are moving in the right direction for us. And I think you'll agree with that once I'm allowed to go on about it. The last one I want to remind you all of is that, hey, we've got our renewal of the China trade case. That work will start in earnest next year. But as you know, we are asking members to get their data into our attorneys now, so we can monitor what's going on in the developments in the market and get a jump start on that work for the China trade case all at the same time. It's really helpful to us from a budgeting standpoint if we can get the data, as well as many of those next year costs we can tackle this year while we're still having the better part of a good year because of the way our physical year runs. I really encourage everybody to get in behind it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, reach out to me and I'll get you wired in. But we need to get that data in. So here's my view of the 232, and this is really where I started kind of jumping back on the bandwagon on this issue. It became apparent to me that the primary aluminum industry is using the current crisis and the closure of the Alcoa Washington plant and current aluminum prices to justify to the administration an increase in the tariff on primary aluminum. The number that I've heard and had confirmed was that they've asked for a 20% tariff, which essentially would double our current number. And with the Midwest premium and the condition it's in these days, I mean, we're paying a Midwest premium that essentially no one in the world is. And to see that extend out even farther would expose us even more. And we can't tolerate that. We find ourselves in a vulnerable position, as I mentioned, with Canada and Mexico as a result, because they've been excluded. On the Canadian side, I hear some noise there, but most of the activity that I'm hearing about these days comes out of Mexico, and they've got a huge price advantage, and they are as hungry for orders as we are, and it's something that's quite concerning. And this is something we warn the administration about, that if you leave us half pregnant, where you have some countries in and some countries not, you create an uneven playing field in our environment, in our larger marketplace, not just U.S. but U.S. and Canada, and that would be detrimental to the state of our industry. So, this is something we talked about, and I believe with the work that's going on by folks on the primary aluminum side, the fact that some of this has gotten out to the media, that there have been news reports about this issue, that we need to stand up. Now's the time for us to put our hat and get our voice out there, and I need your support in helping us get that message not only to the administration but to lawmakers as well, and let them know that this is not the remedy for the extrusion industry for sure. And while we try to recover our industry and build it back, we don't need to be faced with a 20% tariff on primary aluminum. So I'm going to turn this over to the folks from Mayor Brown and let them talk to you about what our plan of attack is that they've worked up for us. Guys, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to you. And for those of you viewing, we've got to switch our screens over, so it might get a little jittery here for a second or two.
Good morning, everybody. This is Warren Payne from Mayor Brown. Jeff, thank you for the opportunity to speak with the AEC members. Hope everybody is safe and managing okay, at least in these difficult times. Yeah, as Jeff noted, there is some fairly fierce advocacy taking place in Washington these days around the 232 tariffs, including a lot of effort by some folks in the primary industry to get a substantial increase in the 232 tariff rate. This is creating quite a bit of uncertainty in terms of the forecasting the operation of the 232. Jeff noted the importance of getting AEC member views to Congress. That's critical. And it's critical in large part because most of the members of Congress, the vast majority, are not going to be supportive of pursuing an increase in the aluminum 232 tariff. They can be an important echo chamber and complement to AEC on this issue. Inside the administration, it's a bit of a mixed picture. Obviously, you have folks like Secretary Mnuchin, Larry Kudlow, who's director of the National Economics Council, and others who would be opposed to the increase in tariffs. But you have other members, such as Peter Navarro's Special Trade Advisor, Secretary Ross, and likely Ambassador Lighthizer at USTR, who would be sympathetic or supportive. I think one thing we can't understate here is, in this administration, more than any other, trade policy decisions are made by the president directly. And so we never know exactly when that decision is going to be made. And as we note with only a little bit of sarcasm, you are only one tweet away. What we would suggest is that AEC cannot wait and cede the field to the folks in the primary industry who are trying to effectuate the increase in the tariff. They need to act now to rebut and hopefully prevent that pressure to increase the tariff. Right now, they are really only hearing extensively from folks in the primary industry. So working with Jeff, working through the data and who all the key players are, we've developed a 4-step plan. First step, a letter from the industry to Secretary Ross. Obviously, Secretary Ross is the primary cabinet official with respect to 232. This letter would make a number of key points, including that the 232 tariffs have not been successful in expanding primary aluminum capacity, reiterate the fact that we should be laser focused on the problem of China, explain how the 232 tariffs have negatively impacted you, your companies, your employees. Explain again how the 232 tariffs have been damaging as they are, and certainly any increase in them, let alone a doubling of them, would be devastating to the industry. Lastly, make the specific ask that the administration revoke the 232 tariffs on aluminum. Now, we'll be honest, highly unlikely that the administration would choose to do that. But it's critical in that it plants a flag in the sand directly opposite of what the folks in the primary industry are advocating for. It gives us a place off of which to work for advocating intermediate actions that would help move the playing field to a more competitive landscape for us and our industry. We'd recommend that all of you send that letter to your individual members of Congress to let them know that you are actively communicating with the administration. You're doing your part We are then asked the members of Congress to help and do their part by reiterating our position to the administration. As I said, Congress is going to be institutionally unsympathetic to the idea, so we have a good audience. We need to motivate them to act. In addition, AEC would have targeted outreach to key members of Congress, those members of Congress who have specific responsibility for trade policy. Those are the members of Congress who have an outsized voice when weighing in with the administration on making decisions on trade policy. We want to make sure we go directly to them and engage them. In addition, we'd suggest executing on a media campaign, op-eds, some other outreach to reporters who cover trade policy in order to counter the message that comes from the primary industry. Again, right now, the playing field in Washington is pretty much just the primary industry guys. We cannot cede any part of the field to them. So I said, not to beat a dead horse, but we cannot leave the playing field just to the primary industry. We need to put a hard marker down to counter what the primary industry is doing and to give us a base off of which to work for other intermediate solutions. At this point, I think it's important to know that there are a few other things that are going to impact these decision makings. Jeff talked about the exceptions for Canada and Mexico. Obviously, there's a partial exception from Argentina. Argentina is not subject to the tariffs. They are subject to a quota. Argentina has never filled that quota, though, so it's as an operational matter, not impacting trade from that perspective. Jeff highlighted how this is complicating the market for all of you. And we're going to need to monitor this and understand how it's going to interact because it does play both ways in terms of the advocacy effort. Obviously, with respect to Canada and Mexico, there was an agreement between the three countries for strict monitoring that has the option for tariffs to snap back if there are surges. Obviously, the primary industry is pointing to that agreement as a reason to snap back the tariffs, arguing that imports have surged from those countries. At this point, for political reasons, very, very unlikely that the administration would even consider that option prior to July 1, when the USMCA is supposed to enter into effect. The administration is not going to want to do anything that potentially risks destabilizing the process for that agreement coming into effect. Now, Jeff did talk about the possibility and the option of a 201 global safeguard investigation. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Matthew McConkey, who's a colleague of mine at Mayor Brown, who can give you the basics on how this works.
Very good. Am I on? Going to assume that I'm on.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. So welcome everybody. So yeah, when we began talking about the 232 challenges that the AEC faced with Jeff a couple months ago, you know, Jeff had mentioned the import competition that y'all are facing, continue to face with respect to extrusions, and especially several new sources that you really hadn't seen before. Lots of new players came onto the field to sort of, in great part, take advantage of the dynamics that the 232 tariff have created. And Jeff had mentioned, as we all know, you know, AD/CVD cases, all trade cases are expensive. But mentioned, you know, listen, that, you know, we understood that the difficulty and the financial implications of trying to bring one of these, a new massive case covering a variety of different countries, and each one is incrementally more expensive. Some of the countries obviously aren't as big of a threat at this point, but the concern is if you don't include them, then they become a threat. And all of it had echoes of a conversation we had about 2.5 years ago with a Mayor Brown client in the solar cell and module manufacturing space here in the United States. So that's why I was listened intently when Jeff was talking about the scope win with respect to the solar mounting system. The solar industry in the United States, even before the AEC took action, had filed AD/CVD cases against China several years ago, and then they had followed up with a similar case against Taiwan. The problem they faced was what we ended up terming very colloquially the whack-a-mole problem of all of a sudden we began to see production and shipments coming out of historical countries that we had not seen before: Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, to a lesser extent Korea. Big part of it happened to be Chinese manufacturers setting up operations in those countries with the support and encouragement of the Chinese government. But in addition to some domestic growth in those countries. And so we had a client facing us, and there was only two real manufacturers left in the country at that point. Our client was the largest in terms of capacity in solar cells, and came to us and said, you know, we're thinking about bringing dumping cases, but you know, we've only got, our pockets are only so deep, and we're incredibly concerned of we bring a case against Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, it's just going to pop up elsewhere. What else can we do? So we began discussions with him about this 201 program that the U.S. has. It's not something people historically, even trade lawyers, have sort of turned to. Indeed, the last time a 201 case had been brought was back in the early 2000s by the in the Bush administration against steel. And you know, there's some great benefits to the program. There's also some things that make it a little less attractive than AD/CVD cases. But it's Jeff, after explaining it to Jeff thought it was worth bringing to the membership for a quick discussion. So that first slide that Warren has put up, you know, this is a law that's been around for a long time. The concept of a safeguard is that all of a sudden there's a surge of imports into the United States that was more or less unexpected, that was not forecast. And when those shipments come into the United States, and we'll get to this in a second, and cause serious injury to a domestic industry, the U.S. government can take action. As you notice, the last bullets here on this first slide, it's only been 75 safeguard investigations between 75 and 2019. Quite a few of them, the ITC has found no serious injury. And many of them they have, and then 28 of them they've imposed, the US government has imposed relief. Next slide. Okay, so this is how these are different. These from AD/CVD, which is what people compare them to. One is, and this makes it easier than an AD/CVD case. You don't have to prove an unfair trade practice. We do not have to demonstrate that the foreign imports, the foreign shipments, are being sold too cheaply, or that they're being subsidized. Whether or not they are being subsidized or being sold too cheaply in the United States is actually irrelevant. Why they're being shipped in or the prices that are being shipped in doesn't really matter. What matters is whether or not we can demonstrate that those shipments are causing serious injury to a domestic industry. And that serious injury test is stronger, more difficult for domestic industries to prove than in a regular AD/CVD case. In addition, because we don't have to prove unfair trade practices, our friends at the U.S. Department of Commerce do not get involved formally in these investigations. The investigations take place at the ITC and at the USTR. Another issue is, you know, in an AD/CVD case, you prove economic injury, you prove dumping and or subsidization. The remedies are tariffs. That's what you get. In a safeguard, there's a whole variety of things you can get and ask for, and it's really wide ranging. You can get tariffs, you can get tariffs plus quotas, and actually in our solar case, that's what we requested and that's what we got. Sort of a downside, I would consider it a downside to these cases in the one sense is if we can go to the ITC and we can prove serious economic injury to our industry. We can get the ITC to recommend relief to the president. In a dumping, let me just go back for a sec. In a dumping CVD case, if we prove injury and we prove dumping and or subsidization, tariffs go into place. There is no political component to it in the sense of, like for example, in the Europe and many other countries, there's a public interest concept where duties that are calculated can be massaged because they don't want to hurt the consumers or whatever it might be. As you know, the U.S. does not have that type of system for AD/CVD. In a 201, it is very different. The president, at the end of the day, is the person who makes the decision as to whether or not to provide relief after the ITC has found injury. So there's a very big political component to it in that regard. Last bullet point on this slide is limited judicial review. It's very difficult for entities to litigate over a 201 action. These are very broad actions. The President of the United States is given incredible discretion to impose remedies the remedies that he believes are needed. And unless there's some type of procedural error in the case, it's not like an AD/CVD case where the foreign exporters or the importers can immediately run into court and get the Court of International Trade to slow things down. Really, it's much more difficult to happen in a 201. Warren, next slide. So here's the, we put together, and these will all be made available to you so you can go back and look at them at your leisure. This is how, we're giving you a short timeline or a quick timeline of how these things work. What you do is you prepare a petition, you file it with the ITC. The ITC issues questionnaires. They accept pre-hearing briefs on injury. So that's when we go in and we say, this is, we're suffering economic injury and it's because of imports. So everybody files those types of briefs. The ITC will hold a hearing. Then there will be post-hearing briefs submitted on injury. Then the commission will vote on injury, and that's around day 120 or day 150. So if the commission, you get an affirmative vote out of the commission saying, yes, we find that there's serious economic injury due to these imports, then the ITC turns its focus to remedy. So how should they remedy it? And so you have a whole new process where, again, there's pre-hearing briefs saying, okay, now that we've demonstrated injury, what should the remedy be? There's another hearing at the ITC, and after the hearing, there's post-hearing briefs on remedy. After that, the commission will do a report to the president, and that's at day 180, saying, Mr. President, we have found injury, and we've looked at the issue of injury, of relief, and these are our recommendations to you of ways that you could alleviate the injury that is being suffered by the domestic industry. So then it becomes under the province of the USTR. Then the USTR picks up the mantle, basically on behalf of the president. So they accept pre-hearing briefs on remedy and say, okay, this is what the ITC recommended. What do you think? Should we do something different? They also have a hearing, and then there's post-hearing briefs on remedy. The USTR takes all of that. There's some interagency discussions, and then the president will issue a decision on what that remedy should be around day 240. Okay, there you go, Warren. Next slide. Okay, so here's a slide that shows the most recent 201 investigations. Again, you had steel which before we filed our case on CSPV cells, so our case was filed in 2017. The first case before that, the most recent case was back in June of 2001. So we filed our case on cells. Quite quickly thereafter, another case was filed on large residential washers. In both of those cases, serious economic injury was found, and remedies were proposed by the ITC, and the president imposed remedies. For large residential washers, they got 3 years. In our cells case, we got 4 years. Okay. The next slide, again, this is more legalese. You can take a look at this. Again, we don't have to prove dumping. We don't have to prove subsidization. It doesn't matter what prices these guys are selling it for. We're just saying in such increased quantities, these imports are coming in that they're seriously causing injury to our industry. The law and FTA bills require a certain different analysis to take place vis-a-vis free trade agreement countries, especially Canada and Mexico. But we can deal with those, and in our solar case, we certainly did. Next slide. Okay. So again, these are just legal standards, the different things the ITC looks at. Next slide. Again, more they look at again, some of this will look familiar to you all from the original AD/CVD case, and you'll see it again in the in your sunset review, which Jeff mentioned that will take place starting next year. But these are just the type of things that the ITC is going to look at, and obviously that we're going to want to look at, or would want to analyze before bringing a 201. Again, these are the procedures for the ITC in the injury phase. Looks very similar to what you see in an AD/CVD investigation. And again, they come out with their issue on injury. So again, you provide all this information, the ITC ends up coming up with a vote. If they vote negative, they find no serious injury, case ends. If affirmative, then they go back and look at injury. Okay. Okay, actually, I got a little messed here. There we go. Again, then if you go to the remedy stage, we got a little off there. If you go to the remedy stage ITC, they collect information again, and then they propose remedies. And then in those stages, you can get various commissioners. I can't remember, we got like 3 or 4 different remedy recommendations out of the commission when we did it. But they're all just recommendations to the USTR. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. So then it goes again to the USTR and then the presidential decision. So again, the president, when he gets the recommendations, he can accept them, he can reject them, he can modify them, he can come out with something completely different than people recommended. He can also do nothing, and that has happened in cases, and the president has said, in various cases, they've looked at it and said, yes, there's serious injury. Yes, we see that the ITC believes that there's certain relief should take place to alleviate that injury. But whatever the president decides, doesn't impose remedies. One of the reasons we saw these first 201s, especially with the current president, is people thought the time was ripe to rebring one of these 201s with the current remedies. Important for if the AEC starts to consider a 201 is that if remedies are imposed, the remedies have to decline over time. Because again, the concept here is that they're going to give you some breathing room. They're going to give you 3 or 4 years or so of breathing room from these imports. But in that time period, so there's a finite time period, which is different than an AD/CVD case, which can continue for decades. it's a finite time period. So the idea is that they will set a step down of the remedies. So if there's tariffs, the tariffs will slowly step down over the 3-4 years or whatever the remedy period is. The idea is we're going to give you some breathing room, but in that time you need to take steps to get yourselves on good footing. Another little bit of a difference here is if the remedies that the president imposes are more than 3 years, in the middle of the time, in the middle of the period, so if like in our case, we got 4 years. So starting the second year, they start a midterm to look at whether or not the domestic industry is taking steps to adjust from the import competition and taking advantage of the relief that the president gave. Let's go to the next slide. So the USTR exclusion process. Once the president has, and this is, I'm just trying to give you all the steps, so were you to consider a 201, there'd be no surprises. Once the president decides to impose remedies and says, yes, we're going forward with this, the USTR does open up what they call an exclusion process. It's not like what you see with these scope requests in the ADC DVD cases, which come, fast and furious and continue over time, making you constantly fend off rearguard actions. This is a finite period of time. The USTR will come out and say, okay, we're imposing remedies on this, and they're going to last 3 or 4 years, whatever it might be. If you think your product should be excluded, you've got, I can't remember what it was in the solar case, I think it was like 3 weeks. You got 3 weeks to let us know. You can file a letter with us and explaining why your product should not be covered. The domestic industry, obviously we get access to those, can file oppositions to those. That's the extent of the process. There is no hearing. There's a written submission by somebody wanting an exclusion. There's written oppositions by those who oppose, and then the USTR makes a decision, and then they close the door. And we saw in the solar case, we saw probably a good 20 or so exclusion requests. Some of them we opposed, some of them we did not. Some were, solar panels of the type that you'd use on an RV or on a sailboat or a boat or something like that to keep your right. Those were not something that that were competitive with our client's product. And so those we didn't oppose, let those go through. There were others that we fought voraciously. Next slide. Okay, again, this is just more information on those midterm reviews. Again, these happen as long as the remedies are 3 years or more. They happen in the middle of the process. And again, it's just a time. Most of it takes place at the ITC, where you get in front of the commissioners again, and it's where the domestic industry says, hey, listen, this is what we've done. Thank you for the relief. This is what we've done. In the meantime, this is what we plan on doing. And the ITC just wants to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. A report goes to the USTR, and then a report from the USTR goes to the president, and the president can make a decision of whether or not he wants to somehow modify the relief or just let everything stay in place. We're in the middle of that process. We're not in the middle, we're almost at the end of that process. In our solar case, the USTR, we believe, is still formulating some recommendations to the president. Next slide. Okay. One of the great things, and actually I'm not sure, and Jeff's probably chomping at the bit. What I did not start off at the beginning, one of the great things about these 201s is they apply to imports from every country across the world. So this is a one-stop. When we got our 201, it applies. We don't have to select countries. We don't have to name countries. It is a 201. It stops all imports, or puts relief on all imports from every country into the United States. So you don't have to play whack-a-mole. It's one big fell swoop. So the budget for one of these things is between $2 3/4 and $3.25 million. Obviously not chump change by any means, but it is significantly less expensive than trying to bundle a bunch of AD/CVD cases. Of course, you have the downside in the fact that the duration of these is limited, and you've got a little bit of the wild card with the presidential decision. But it is a way, and it certainly has been helpful in both the washers industry, domestic washers industry, and for the domestic solar industry, to give yourself some breathing room when you find imports flooding into the market, like we're starting to see with respect to aluminum extrusions. So again, there's a lot of information. You'll have these slides, and Jeff can take this further if there's interest by the members. Thank you.
Matthew and Warren, thank you for your presentations. It's a very interesting idea. It is an alternative strategy from a legal standpoint. It may have some benefits that we wouldn't get in the other direction, but it may have some drawbacks as well. And certainly something that I think we should consider and think about as we collect the data through this year and formulate what kind of strategy. As we started talking about in our fall conference last year, we have a variety of countries that are in focus. It may not be a one-size-fits-all solution because it may not be a one-size-fits-all problem, but to the extent that there are options that are available for us to consider, I thought it would be worth your time to hear them talk about that. So let me move past that. One thing I wanted to do here, and Dennis, who's our technology support, we've got some time here for some questions, but unfortunately, Dennis, I can't see the attendees, so I won't know. I don't imagine I'll have the questions sent to me. But can you tell me who would receive any questions we get?
Hey, Jeff, this is Nancy. So we had some technical difficulties with Dennis. So I'm on. I don't see any questions. Has anybody posed a question at this point? Okay.
All right. Let's leave it there. Give you a second. I want to close and go into summary here. As you heard discussed, I think it's a wise move on our part for AEC and AEC members to stand up on this 232 issue and be sure an alternative voice is heard. We don't want those seeking an increase in our aluminum prices to own the floor. We've got to get in there. With that said, I wanted to have this webinar as quickly as we could to get this information in front of you. However, we won't. So let's say we're in our huddle right now. We're huddling up, calling our play, but we won't execute the play till after the holidays. And I'm thinking that the first week of June would be a good time for us to launch the Ross letter and for you all to launch your letters to the membership or to your letters to the lawmakers. And we will coordinate that activity coming out on the other side of the holidays. I'll get an email to each of you, to all of our members, with the letters to be sure you have them, with instructions, and with the contact information of your lawmakers' offices. And to the extent that we can coordinate our efforts and get those all out in the same week, and if we can get some media attention on this, I think we can make our voice heard. And that's the objective here. In the meantime, if you look at your toolbar that comes with the webinar, you'll see over one of the little groups that they have is something called handouts. And if you click on that arrow and open that up, you'll see that the two handouts are there. There's both the Ross letter and then what would be your letter that you will send to your lawmakers. We've all done this in the past. I think most of you know the routine, but your staff information about which lawmakers are where may have changed. So we've just recently updated everything here, so we have good contact information. Of course, that was during the pandemic, so some of those folks may have fallen away. So we'll do the best we can. But that's the idea. We're gonna gather back up, get everything in front of everybody right after the holidays, put ourselves in a position to execute our communication plan the first week of June, and take it from there. Ultimately, I've asked Mayor Brown if they can, at a minimum, get a conference call for AEC members, myself, and others with someone in the White House. We'd like to do that. And along the way, we may have other conversations that develop as a result of our letters to the lawmakers. So there could be staffers and others that circle back to us in response to us, asking more questions. And I will be the in-betweener for those. If they haven't come to you directly, I'll let you know that they've come back to us and invite you to participate in that discussion as well. Because as Warren mentioned, and Warren is very well connected on the Hill. That's why I like him. I don't like who he roots for in baseball, but I do like what he does for us. And we'll circle back and get that done. If you have any questions about this, and if the technology didn't allow us to execute that today, please feel free to email me or give me a call. It's jhenderson@tso.net or 318-348-0425. Again, I want to thank Mayor Brown. Yes, Nancy.
I'm sorry. So, Jeff, I did see a couple of people raise their hands. Andy Curlin, I think, raised his hand. Andy, I unmuted you. Did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my question was, what can we do that will get some faster action than waiting around a year and another $2.5 million in legal fees? Because that's what was outlined in this presentation. I appreciate that's the time involved, but as they said earlier in the presentation, with one tweet, all of a sudden these actions were put into place without much thought. So what can be done? Can we look at an alternative to the 201 that could get us what we need? And the concern is largely coming from Mexico. And what we're seeing now is only going to worsen considerably over the next year while we're spending $2.5 million in new legal fees to address an issue where we're not sure of the outcome.
Well, that's a good question, Andy, and I think that's why we wanted to meet today, was to give folks some insight in what actions could take. What we talked about in San Antonio and a little bit in the last conference last fall was filing an AV-CVD case. The issue, even if we decided to do that, is that we have to come up with the data that shows and proves injury. And that is a process that we are going through right now. And that's why I'm beseeching the members to get that data in, because now that the market is in the tank, now's the time where we can be showing problems. And we're not getting that data. So I can't do anything, even if you guys gave me the green light. So the data is key to us moving forward anywhere. The second issue is that we have to address the budget side of this. These funds don't exist in the AEC today. They will have to be raised. And as a result of that, we're going to have a huge consensus within AEC membership that this is the direction we want to go at a time when even making today's dues payments are struggle for extruders. So those are the two things. We need the will within the AEC to move forward, but we need the data that assures us that we have a winning case.
Okay, thanks. It looks like Nick has a question as well. Your audio is off, so unfortunately, I don't think we can hear you, Nick. So you might want to type your question into the question box, and I can read it. And then, let's see, I think, Guy, did you have a question? While Nick types in his question, I can unmute you, Guy. I thought that maybe you had your hand up. Let me find you on my attendee list here real quick. And I'm not seeing him anymore. Where is he? There he is. Okay, Guy, got you unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. quick question. Obviously, one item I picked up on, it seems that this 201 has a very short duration, possibly up to 3 years, maybe greater. But so we're only buying time here. So I guess the question is, what is the backup plan if we were to go ahead with a 201 and say we get, we win our case? We know it's only going to be temporary. Then what? Because, the issue will never go away.
Right. Well, I've had some discussions with Wiley Rain and other contexts about this, and I certainly invite Mayor Brown if they want to. But one of the things, and this is what I was just trying to articulate in answering Andy's question, is that in order to win a case, you have to show injury. So you have to have data that comes in and says that here's the condition of our industry, and you have to be able to have data that indicates that that's a result of imports. And that injury can be both lost volume, but it could also be lost revenue or margins as a result of price pressures from foreign imports. But we have to collect all of that in order to get that done. So why that circles back to this, Guy, is that we should consider that if the 201 is something we want to do, because in theory, the 201 will help us get healthy. So at the end of the period when the 201 expires, even though we will have lost our protection, we will have a track record of success. So we won't be in a position to just go right ahead and file an AD/CVD case because we won't have any data to show that we're injured. This is what Wiley Rain had explained to me in the past is back in former times, especially mostly in reference to 232s or 301s, the steel industry would do that and say, okay, you gave us this protection with these orders, but now we need to pick it up with AD/CVD, and the government would say, no, you're not injured, you're good to go, you're not getting any relief. They made them go through the pain before they could refile a case. So it is important for us to understand that if we try to use some of these other trade laws and look for temporary relief, is it worth it to us for the 4 years to do that, knowing that we're going to suffer pain afterwards before we're likely to be able to take another case? But do you want to take that pain in 4 years after you've been healthy, or do you want to take that pain now? So that's kind of how that equation works. Warren and Matthew, I'm sure I probably missed something in that, or may even be wrong. You want to comment on that?
No, I think that's it. Listen, it's not, there's no question 201 is not a silver bullet, nor is AD/CVD. It's just something else to consider. And again, what the problem we faced and I'm just going to go back with the example of our solar client was, they did not, at the time, they were really looking sort of just at 3 countries, but they knew, and so they're talking, several $1 million to bring the AD/CVD cases. Their concern was, and it was a very real concern, was that as soon as they spent that money to stop the flow of goods from Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, that they were simply going to pop up elsewhere. And so they were going to be spending several $1 million year after year after year chasing this stuff around. So their decision was, and it could be different for different industries. That's not, but their decision was, we just need some breathing room, and from everybody, and we need it right now. And we're going to take that time to restructure. We're going to take that time to, work out some supply chain issues, and and there's a little bit of hope that once the relief lifts, that there will be a little bit less incentive for some of these other countries to continue shipping to the U.S. So they may get some relief out of that, if that makes sense.
I'd like to, let's talk a little bit about the 232 issue again, because those triggers you were talking about that the administration has at their disposal with the new USMCA, there does seem to be evidence of what's coming up out of Mexico that this is really having an impact on us. They're looking at the primary flow out of Canada, but I think if you read the article in Essentials that Greg Whitbecker put together for us. He's just talking about where folks have preferred to buy their metal in a down market when metal became available. They just assumed buy it from Canada than from overseas. It wasn't an act on Canada's part to destroy our industry. So there's an interpretation there we have to work through.
Okay.
And do you believe, therefore, Warren or Matthew, that we may have an opportunity to really get in front of somebody and talk very strongly about this Mexican issue?
So this is Warren. I'll chime in first, and Matthew can obviously pile on. As I noted, the new USMCA is scheduled to go into effect July 1, so in a little over a month. There's virtually no way the administration would put tariffs back on Mexico prior to that date. They're just not going to do anything that might rock the boat or impede implementation. After that, it's a little bit of a different ball game, but it's going to be a very significant uphill battle. As I noted, Congress is not a fan of these aluminum 232 tariffs, and they are particularly vocal about not wanting or believing that those tariffs should apply to our closest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. We could look at the numbers, see what the impact is, put our best case forward, but it's going to be a very uphill battle, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is Matthew. I agree. It's having and pulling this data together and watching it closely and figuring out some time to pass this message along certainly can't hurt, but you're not going to see movement on it anytime soon.
Okay, Jeff, Nick just wanted to verify all countries include Canada and Mexico.
Correct.
Okay. And then Mike Flynn has a question. I'm going to unmute you, Mike, if you want to ask your question.
I'm trying.
There you go. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I think it was partially answered. So how does a 201 or CBD case trump, no pun intended, trump the USMCA? And I guess it can if they have the appetite to pursue it, is the short answer to the question that was just discussed. Is that correct?
Correct. There's no exception in the 201 law or in the USMCA that says that Canada and Mexico are exempt from the 201 statute, just like they're not exempt from AD/CVD cases. Now, there's a requirement that it's looked at a bit differently, but it's not an exclusion. So
yeah,
by any means.
I think Jeff kind of said it, and more, having factories on both sides of the border, it's there. One of the bigger concerns is certainly on the Mexico side, is their ability to bring in China scrap and smelt it into billet and then extrude it and ship it into the U.S. marketplaces unabated under the USMCA. That's a massive concern into a number of markets coming in there. And I think as far as evidence to demonstrate, especially during the COVID time and things like that, the amount of imports coming in from foreign bodies, including Canada and Mexico, but Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, I think certainly can demonstrate that under the current circumstances that there is injury to the U.S. market. We're working to demonstrate that. In Canada right now, we're pulling together that information right now to see if there's a case. And I would think the Canadian group would certainly share if we think there's a case on the Canadian side, there's likely to be one on the U.S. side. But my concern is kind of the USMCA and how that feeds in to the 232. And then the other side of the coin, and again, Jeff and I spoke about this, was, with the 232 coming in, and for any of us extruding on the West Coast as a domestic supplier, so we're at a disadvantage with all the foreign metal coming into the U.S., the billet coming into the U.S. on the West Coast is faced with the 232. We don't have another option, so we're at a significant disadvantage with foreign metal coming in. We need foreign metal, and the cost of the raw material is high.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
End of question. That's it. So it was more of a statement. I think it was answered on the USMCA side.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Any other questions?
This is Duncan. I think I've been unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because the 201 is at the end of the day is a political decision, and looking at the timeline, that's going to take us beyond the election in the fall. Can you give us a flavor for different administrations, the Republican versus the Democratic administration, and what are the odds are that there would be a favorable response to whatever ITC came up with, Republican versus Democrat?
This is Warren. I'll take a first crack at that. I mean, obviously, if there is not a change of administration, if the Trump administration continues after the election, we don't really expect much of a change at all, to be perfectly honest. This is not the type of issue where we think a second-term Trump administration changes its tune. A second-term President Trump doesn't suddenly become a globalist and back off his trade views. They're just too deeply set. It is a good question in the Biden administration. The Biden campaign has already talked aggressively about being more multilateral and kind of coordinating with allies in a way on trade policy to differentiate themselves from the Trump administration. That said, earlier this week, the United Steelworkers endorsed Joe Biden for president. He's going to count on a lot of labor union support. We all know what the labor unions think about global trade. They've been strong supporters of all the trade actions, and I would expect that to continue. So it is a bit more nuanced if you have a Biden administration, but I don't think it in any way precludes a successful result. Matthew did note that the last time the 201 was imposed before we brought our solar case was a steel case that took place during the George W. Bush administration, who is about as far opposite from President Trump on trade policy as you can imagine. And even in that administration, tariffs and restrictions were imposed.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question, Duncan, and not just in reference to the 201, but the future of the 232 as well. I mean, do you have an expectation, or do you think it's a fair expectation, Warren, that one of the things the Biden administration would do would be to remove the 232?
It's generally, as I said, because of the labor union support for the 232, is going to be difficult for the Biden administration to immediately pull back on the 232.
Okay.
I can envision a Biden administration looking for opportunities to negotiate at least some of the 232 duties away. For example, to find some face-saving option to repeal the 232 duties with respect to the European Union and the UK, and maybe with respect to Japan, kind of the quote-unquote allies. It's going to be a more difficult exercise for them to somehow say, listen, we're going to pull tariffs back on product from China, for example. So it is a bit more nuanced set of circumstances. Very difficult to imagine a Biden administration pulling back on any of the tariffs immediately.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
I don't see anybody else raising their hands or any other questions, so I think we're good.
Okay. I do want to make note that in the presentation, I saw a reference to Alcoa in there that was unfortunate. It should have been edited out. I thought we caught that. That was an error. So if you caught that yourself, please know that we recognize that. We'll amend that before we post the presentation. I want to thank everybody for their attendance today, and this is a very important issue. I want to remind you our next step on this will be an email from me to our members with the content, a fresh copy of the letter, instructions, and the contact information for your lawmakers. And then we hopefully can move all at the same time on this and pretty quickly and decisively and make our voice be heard on the 232. On the 201, take it in consideration. Give me a call. Let's talk about it. Let's have some discussion about whether this seems like something we should chew on any further. It certainly will be something we talk about and discuss in our Fair Trade Committee to get their sense. And so if you serve on that committee, be prepared to talk about that. And if you don't, you have some comments, please give me a call. I'll be sure that your voice is heard. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Memorial Day weekend and stay safe.